I'm Kendall, winemaker for Goose Ridge. The season got off to a really late start with lots of spring rains and very cool temperatures, and that put us behind a good 3 weeks early on. We've caught up a little bit to the point where we started to see veraison at a similar date from other years, but this year it seems that veraison has really dragged on and prolonged the period, so we're still not at full veraison anywhere yet. And even though there's lots of color out there and the grapes look good, we've got nice exposure, still seems to be dragging on longer than we would have expected.
What do you expect harvest will start?
We're looking at right around September 15th.
And that's
give or take a few days.
That's a good 10 days after normal, you think?
It's a little bit later than normal, yeah. Typically right around Labor Day, we'd be expecting to pull off the first of the whites, and I think it's going to be more around the 15th to the 13th through the 18th, somewhere in that time frame.
So from a winemaker's perspective, does that compress the entire harvest, or do you kind of anticipate everything will just kind of move along at a normal pace?
I think everything's going to move along at a fairly normal pace. What it does, from my perspective, is what's going to happen at the end of harvest. Typically late October weather is pretty unpredictable and makes me a little nervous that we might not have the time at the end of the season to get everything in as nicely as we would like to.
What varieties kind of worry you the most?
Well, Cabernet, it's typically the latest ripening variety that we deal with, and quite often it's not coming, the early Cabernets aren't coming off until early October and typically go through late October, even into early November, depending upon the weather. And last year, with the early October freeze that we had, was particularly troublesome. Hopefully we don't have an event like that again this year. That could really be disastrous for us. And we definitely need a September similar to what we had last year. That last year's September is as near perfect a September as I've ever seen.
I've got to say, a day like today where we've got like 77 degrees and not a cloud in the sky, you've got to hope for that for another 45 days or so.
Yeah, if we can keep this going for a while longer, that'd be great. Maybe even a little bit warmer, into the mid-80s would be ideal.
Now, speaking of heat, we hit kind of a really hot spot kind of mid-July through maybe through the end of July and even into August a little bit. That doesn't really help either, does it? It doesn't really help with ripening much.
It can definitely be too warm. Photosynthetic capacity maxes out at about 94 degrees Fahrenheit. So anything above that, you start to decrease your amount of photosynthetic capability, which doesn't help your ripening. And the really hot heat spikes in July can actually be detrimental to quality. We're finding that there's an atypical aging defect that's cropping up in some of the vineyards that get overly heat exposed, particularly white wines, and so that's a real concern in a vintage where we get those kind of heat spikes.
Tell me about this vineyard. This vineyard is only, what, 12 or 13 years old, and it's already one of the largest, or the largest in the state. Yes,
it was first planted in 1998. We're right around 1,600 acres now, the largest contiguous vineyard in the state. The Munson family have really made a commitment to this industry, and with our new facility that we built a couple of years ago, really trying to take the wines to the next level and develop a name for Goose Ridge.
Well, and you certainly have some good highway exposure for the winery now. Now, of course, all the grapes don't go to you for the Goose Ridge label.
No, we take a small percentage of very select rows from several different blocks, but most of the production actually goes to St. Michel and Columbia Crest. We farm the blocks to their specification, and then a lot of our production is custom crushing on their behalf, following the wine protocols that they give us.
I'm guessing even as large as Columbia Crest is, even they run out of room for 2 million cases.
They do. They have gone through some really exponential growth, and they haven't been able to create the infrastructure to deal with all of that. So they've worked with about 5 different custom crush facilities around the state.
Okay. Tell me about your background. You've been in this Washington wine industry a long time.
I came to Washington in 1993 to work on the Chateau Ste. Michelle Red team when they were just building the Canoe Ridge Estate facility. I spent 10 years there working with Charlie Hoppus and Mike Janik and Ron Bonnell before I went over to Walla Walla. Spent a year at the Canoe Ridge Vineyard in Walla Walla before moving on to Washington Vintners, and just recently left there earlier this year to move over to Goose Ridge. And it's been great. I've had a fantastic career in Washington.
Tell me a little bit more about this facility, when it was built, and what the production capacity is.
This facility was built in 2008. That was the first vintage harvested and processed in this facility. So this will be the third year for this facility. We will be doing roughly 8,500 tons through this facility this year. 1,000 tons of press and go juice for Columbia Crest and Ste. Michelle, and then 7,500 tons of wines that will be processed to stay here and age for a certain length of time before Columbia Crest and Ste. Michelle take receipt of those.
I expect that for you it's kind of exciting you're only going to work with these grapes, is that right? Pretty much?
Yes.
So you walk outside of your office, you got 1,600 acres sitting out here that you can look at it as much as you want, and it's got to save you a lot of miles from driving.
Oh, absolutely. I typically stop at the blocks on the way into the winery, cruise out at lunch and take a look at some other blocks during the day, and can even check on other blocks as I stop at the tasting room on my way home. So it certainly, from a winemaking standpoint, makes it much easier to keep in touch with what's going on with the fruit. I've worked in locations where I was dealing with enough vineyards that were so dispersed that it would take me 3 or 4 days to get around to see all the fruit that I was going to receive that year. So this makes my life a lot easier.
That. Speaking of now, the quality, I know we're late, but the quality, what's your assessment?
I think the quality, if the weather holds, is still going to be phenomenal. We've opened up the canopies, gotten a lot of good light exposure into the fruit zone. The berries are small, the clusters are loose, and so potentially can be some really fantastic quality. Like most vintages, it's really the September weather that'll determine whether it's a great vintage or not.
Or just a typical Washington good vintage.
Right.
All right.
Right.
Well, Kendall, thanks for your time.
Thank you.